Hello, everybody. It's Rob Seaver, Executive Director with Pace. We're bringing you the inaugural version of Keeping Pace with Michele, Shuster, and myself. Today, we're also joined with special guest Josh Stevens of McMurray and Shuster. And I want to get straight into this. What we're really trying to do is we're going to bring you all of the relevant news and ongoings that are happening within the space and the industry that are impacting your business. And so we're super excited to start this series, and it's going to be a weekly series if we can get ourselves in order with all the technology and getting it done. Michele, Josh, thank you guys for joining us today. We're going to try to keep this short and to the point. How are you doing?
Really excited about doing these. It's going to be a great way to keep people up to speed on the latest happenings in the compliance and regulatory world, and really happy to have Josh here, who will probably be tag teaming on these as schedules allow, but we want to make sure we get these out every week, and it'll be great content and keep you up with the latest news in your business world.
I'm excited about it. You and I have talked about putting this together for some time, and so we're finally doing it. Let's see if this one goes. This is our third attempt. Michele, I want to start off with you because obviously we've been knee-deep in responses to the FCC as it relates to their notice of proposed rulemaking. Let's just go ahead and kick it off, get that out of the way. Where are we? What's the latest update? What do we have going on?
I think everybody knows at this point, in March, the FCC approved a further notice of proposed rulemaking that would significantly affect the lead generation world, and it would dictate what is required to be on lead generation forms in order to be valid consent to make phone calls. And so it is a really critical time for the industry. A lot of what is being proposed is something that we need to get the industry perspective on. We have put together a coalition of members and some non-members as well to help us get that, that background, that information, so that we can include that in the comments that we're filing with the FCC. Josh will be an integral part of the team that's drafting those comments. So if you are interested in this and you are not on our coalition mailing list, send an email to Rob Seaver at paceassociation.org, and he will get you on the list to be part of the coalition. Anything else you want to add, Josh?
No, I think it's just important to highlight that we really can only do this with input from members. While we, the lawyers, can make all the arguments we want, what really matters is the data on how this is going to impact the industry and potential solutions. And so that's why that input is so critical to having an effective set of comments.
You're lawyers? Oh my God, that makes so much sense.
I know, right? You can hear the hot air coming out of us, but
sorta, kinda. Look, Michele, this is important for us. Obviously, the biggest thing, I know that we just finished LeadsCon just a few weeks ago. Brought home some luggage with us all, but we're feeling better. But the thing is that, it was the talk of the show. Obviously, as it relates to this marketing partners list, which I think was really the focus of what we're talking about here, the responses that I was hearing was everything from, hey, this is the end of the world, we might as well throw out everything and start something fresh, to, hey, this is kind of business as usual for this industry. We as lead generation and performance marketers, we've had to adhere to regulations and legislation, and as we all feel, the majority of what we're being impacted by isn't happening by those who are trying to do the right thing. Right. And so, when we look at this marketing partner list, the one thing that I was curious about, do you feel like, crystal ball, and Josh, feel free to jump in here, do you feel like this is where we're going to see a requirement of one-to-one, or do you think that this is still going to be one-to-many, but that many may be restricted? I
think we're past the one-to-one. The definition of prior express written consent that the FCC has proposed does not have that one-to-one correlation that was mentioned in the public knowledge request for declaratory ruling that started this whole process. So what we're looking at is the pages are going to look much different. So whereas now you can have a linked marketing partner list, under the current proposed rule, you would have to list every potential seller that would place a phone call to the consumer on the same page as the consent information. And not only that, but the sellers that are linked must be logically and topically related. So it must, the sellers that are receiving consent must have something to do with the topic of the web page, the lead form, whatever information it is that they're seeking. And what we really need to point out as we're commenting on these is that consumer choice is really affected by some of what the FCC is proposing, and so really critical that in the zeal to get new regulations out there and to stem the robocall floods that the FCC talks about, that we don't overdo it and we don't move in a way that's really going to curtail consumer choice.
That logical and topical, I hope that they're very clear and conspicuous of what they
exactly. Yeah.
I've been waiting to use that. I still can't say attestation very well, but I mean, at the end of the day, we're going to watch this and monitor it. And then obviously we talked about this monthly call that we're having with a coalition.
Bi-weekly,
now we're I don't know. We're
bi-weekly, every 2 weeks.
Weekly, is that what it is? I should stay abreast of this information. Thank you. But this weekly call, we're now, I think I saw 70-something companies that are involved with it, and it's growing every week. And so it's a huge coalition, and obviously there to talk about what's the most in the best interest of the industry and how can we move forward in a responsible way. But you said it, protecting consumers, offering them choice, doing what we should be doing ethically and morally. So I think we're good, and we're going to continue to monitor and submit comments as needed. I want to shift gears a little bit because prior to this, one of the areas that we were really honing in on and paying attention to was privacy. And I know that, Josh, you're updating us every week with the newest, the latest, and greatest. Can you give us some updates of what's going on in the privacy world?
Yeah, and actually, just over the past couple of weeks, there have been a couple fairly significant developments. Let's start west and work our way east. So we'll start with California, which is fitting since California is where these general privacy laws really started with the California Consumer Privacy Act back in 2020. So
it gave us a full year of talking about something that we didn't even know until it got there. And then when it got there, nobody was being sued under it, right? And so now where are we with stuff like that?
The California Privacy Protection Agency conducted a rulemaking in connection with the California Privacy Rights Act. And if you haven't picked up a trend yet, all of these things have nearly identical acronyms, which makes them so fun to try to keep straight. But in that rulemaking, which touched on a lot of key issues around privacy notices of collection, the ways that you have to accept and honor consumer rights, contract requirements, so on and so forth, those rules are now final. Those have been approved by the Office of Administrative Law, and they are now out there for everyone to begin to follow. July 1st is the enforcement date. So the law is currently in effect. July 1st is the enforcement date for the revisions, the changes that were made to the law. And so we're, 3 months out from that date. So I would encourage anyone that is worried about CCPA to diving into those regulations and get those changes made. Stepping a little bit east, Colorado, similar sort of thing. Yeah.
Hey, Josh, could I pause you for a second? Go before we leave California, since I love that state so much. Disneyland is there, as you guys know. Anyway, one of the things early on that the CCPA lacked, and I believe picked up, or at least in some version of it, was a private right of action. And that's really what I know trips the trigger with a lot of these people in the industry, because that's where really the damages can go up, right? And in CCPA, is there a private right of action, and is that tied to anything that's going on right now? And can you just give me a quick
so there is a limited private right of action under the CCPA that is specifically tied to data breaches. So if a business experiences a data breach and they failed to implement reasonable security measures as required under CCPA, then there can be a private right of action in connection with that with statutory damages. So that is a significant risk point, but it is limited, again, to the data breach context. However, I would not downplay entirely the ability of regulators to seek enforcement under CCPA. There used to be a 30-day notice and cure right. That went away on January 1st. Regulators now can go after a CCPA violation out the gate, and we actually saw with Sephora a few months ago the first enforcement action resulting in a $1.2 million penalty specifically around honoring do not sell rights. And so I expect that's going to continue to ramp up over the coming months as obviously the July 1st enforcement date for CPRA comes into effect. So yeah, it's not a huge private right of action risk, but there's definitely enforcement risk. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Has some teeth, at least, right? All right. Sorry about that. I just thought we'd.
Yeah. So now let's move to the mountains,
which is my favorite state. So this is good. We're working our way in a way that I like. So
yeah, and I just bought to tell you right. So we're just keeping with the Colorado theme. But so the Colorado AG's office was also working on a rulemaking under the Colorado Privacy Rights Act, which comes into effect July 1st. That is now final. That became final, I believe it was last week. I would encourage people to really check out those rules. There are some key differences from California. For example, the way that they want privacy policies structured is a little bit different. The notices that they want around consent are very detailed in a way that California had not given a great deal of explanation as to what information needs to be in consent disclosures. And they have some very onerous requirements around loyalty programs. So for anyone who's subject to the Colorado Act, you definitely want to look at those regulations, and you might have to go back and make some adjustments to what you were originally planning on because they have changed a few things.
How are you seeing companies handle their privacy policies with all the different state requirements? Are they separating those out? It's time for us to get up, just in case anybody was wondering.
So what I'm seeing generally is what I'll call a lowest common denominator method, right? So trying to develop a policy that works for all the different states, with the potential exception of an additional California notice. In the California rules that were just made final, it was very clear that the agency wants the California notice of collection to be a standalone notice or a standalone section of the privacy policy. And so I am seeing a lot of businesses having a standalone California notice.
Yeah.
Well, it's actually popping up a lot as I'm surfing around. There's an additional disclaimer there. Yeah, for sure. We got
one more.
East, right?
One more
is there anything
update
else
further
in Colorado?
east, and that is Iowa.
One more, right?
Iowa has become the 6th state to pass comprehensive privacy legislation. It comes into effect January 1st, 2025, so businesses have some time. One of the nice things about the Iowa bill is it's very similar to Virginia and Colorado, but actually trimmed back a little bit. So there are some things missing from the Iowa bill compared to Colorado and Virginia. So if you've already implemented Colorado and Virginia, or will by July 1st for Colorado, you'll be in pretty good shape for Iowa, and then it'll probably just be a matter of extending rights to Iowans before the deadline.
Michele, look, obviously every time we hop on our government affairs call or compliance officer forum call, Josh is bringing us, doom and gloom
Just
from
that
this
way,
state, and the next state, and the next state, and the next state. How does Mr. Doom and Gloom? We're going to get you one of those big,
that's big black
the
robe
thing they call it. You just and a big long robe, big black robe. Michele, how if we're operating in this space today? I mean, how do we keep up, and how do we know? Like, what is, Josh mentioned the lowest common denominator.
Well, you hire Josh, of course, but beyond that, I mean, this is something that PACE is a really great resource for. And even if I wasn't general counsel for PACE, I would still say this because we have two different forums that you can go to get information. One is the Government Affairs Committee, and so that's more of a working committee. The folks that are on the Government Affairs Committee, we expect to get involved with things like FCC comments, and if we have state law laws that are being introduced, helping us contact the legislators that are in the states where you're located. And so that's more of an active group, an active committee. But we do go through all of the bills that are pending and then also that pass. Of course, when they pass, you and I will be talking about them on the podcast, or you and Josh. And then we have the Compliance Officers Forum, which is a little bit less active as far as having to work for that committee or that forum. But that's one where compliance officers from member companies get together and talk about the challenges that they're facing. And I'm sure some of those conversations are around implementation of these new privacy laws, but also implementation of the other state and federal laws that are coming into enactment now. And then also just being able to provide each other with practical advice about the way their company meets these requirements. So really two great resources through PACE.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we get calls weekly on like, hey, I just heard this and everything, and we point them to you, obviously, for counsel, and then obviously to our subcommittees that you just mentioned. So I find it mind-boggling. Every day it seems like there's something else popping up, and that kind of leads me to the next one that I want to talk about is, everything was up in the air because of the FCC's notice of proposed rulemaking, but there were other entities out there doing things, and we're about to probably hear from one. Is that,
and
is that the
it's
case?
not by accident that things like this happen. I can tell you from having been a former consumer protection chief of an attorney general's office is that the federal and state regulators, they work together. They meet regularly at the National Association of Attorneys General's meetings. They have special task forces that they put together, relevant to our industry, the anti-robocall task force that has almost all of the AGs involved. And in the summits that they hold, the federal regulators are there as well, the FCC, the FTC. And so they're sharing information about enforcement actions and also identifying what they consider loopholes in the law. And so, we're seeing a lot of agency activity right now. The FCC has proposed a couple of rules recently. One has to do with amending their negative option rule, which right now really only applies to pre-notification types of arrangements like book clubs or things that you sign up for the club to receive them, and you'll be receiving notice that the next item is coming, and unless you decide not to take that, then you'll get it. And but what they're moving to are more of the automatic renewal negative option continuity programs in this rule that they're proposing. And the tagline that's really gotten everybody's attention this week is that it must be as easy to opt out of these auto renewal or continuity programs as it was to opt into those. And there are some states too that require that you be able to do that online. California.
Yeah, California is one.
Those.
There's probably about a dozen at this point who have auto renewal laws, and they vary in their applicability depending on the initial term, the renewal term, yada yada yada. Right? They all have different applicability. But if the FTC sets one national standard, and knowing how this FTC has been, they don't like to preempt state laws, so states would probably layer or potentially layer additional requirements on top of it. I think you would see a real shift in how some of these programs work. And one of the facets of this rule that really jumped out to me has to do with saves. The rule, as it's proposed, does not allow you to make save offers to a consumer unless they affirmatively consent to you attempting to save them.
So give me an example of a save offer.
So
what would
think
that look
about.
like?
I often think about a very well-known radio service that's in a lot of vehicles, and when you go to.
Are you serious? Are we talking about radio stuff
And when
now?
you cancel,
Oh my gosh.
right? They
Got
often will say, "Well, what if we could give it to you for $10 a month or $5 a month?" Right? And
They switch me to the retention
But so they
department
try to give you
first, right?
offers, often at a lower price point, to keep you a member of the service. Makes sense from a commercial perspective. What this rule would say is you'd have to ask the consumer first, would you like to hear
Other offers.
And if they say no, then you can't attempt to save them.
And so even going beyond the FTC, the CFPB is looking at lead generators right now too, and anybody who was in the in the telemarketing space back in, I would probably say like the 2017-18 timeframe, and working with financial institutions, they know how onerous the CFPB can be when it comes to issuing CIDs and enforcement. Back then, it was looking at any telemarketing company, any service provider that was offering phone services for a financial institution, and asking that they produce all records related to that financial institution. Really onerous to try to respond to those types of requests. And so if the CFPB starts to implement, which they've started the initial processes for now, something focused on lead generation, then we can expect that we would see that same kind of attention, in the performance marketing space. So, lots going on right now between the CFPB, the FTC, the AGs, the FCC, and so it's really important to stay on top of things now and just know what's coming so you can prepare for it.
Before I jump into kind of our commercial on our events that are upcoming, are there any other topics or any areas that we missed or didn't cover that you'd like to throw out there before we?
I think we're good for this week.
Gears?
We'll be back next week, though.
Yeah, we got to hold something for next week.
That's great.
Oh, I'm sure there'll be plenty.
Oh, that's true.
The rate of change recently,
True.
there'll be plenty.
True, and that's one of the things for the listeners. I do think it's important to highlight when you're in Q1 or Q2, most state legislatures are in session, and so it's a very active time for rulemakings and for statutory changes. That slows down usually as you get further into the year. More states are out of session, but still some things can happen during the quiet times.
Especially at the federal level.
Especially at the federal level. They like to sneak in some surprises when no one's looking.
For sure.
That's right.
So yeah, I mean, it is the time to be watching what's going on because everybody's in session.
And they're going to be testing the constitutionality of the CFPB at some point down the road, and so that's going to be something we all need to look out for. And so, just a lot of movement. And then, obviously, the biggest thing is that we're coming up on an election year, and as we continue to look at what that's going to look like, I'm sure things are going to be moving around quite a bit. Obviously leadership at the FCC and things like that. It's, those are the areas that we have to watch. Well, look, before we get going and finalizing our inaugural version or edition of Keeping Pace, I'd also like to explain that we do 2 events a year, and these events are incredible for you. There's a ton of value. And the first one is coming up May 21st through the 23rd. That's in Washington, D.C. at the Renaissance Arlington Capitol View. Please get your tickets. You can navigate to Pace Summit DC. You can buy them, pick them up there. We'd love to have you. The nice thing about this event is that we're going to have someone from the FTC, the FCC, the CFPB, the CTIA.
And the State Attorney General.
Those acronyms,
We'll have
really
the
do
State
need
Attorney
to show.
General from Ohio.
And I think that is one of the bigger announcements here. Michele, give me a real quick down and dirty of why it's important that this AG is
because he is one
here.
of the leaders in the anti-robocall task force, and so his name is Jim Petro. He's the Attorney General of Ohio, and he's really helping, and his staff really helping to drive the policy on that anti-robocall task force front. Yeah, so look, we're just packing in the content, and so if you're interested in compliance, if you have the regulatory compliance, wheel, and that's your responsibility at your company, you have to be at an event like this. We're going to cover topics A to Z, and so that once again is May 21st through 23rd in Arlington, Virginia, and there will be a very, very cool tour of Congress if you sign up fast enough and get involved with that tour that we'll be announcing soon. And then I'm going to move real quickly to October, and this October we're going to be with our annual convention and expo, or ACX, at the Charlotte Convention Center in Charlotte, North Carolina. Very, very fast-moving NASCAR theme. Our Monday night event is going to be at the NASCAR Hall of Fame, where we are going to challenge people and pit crew, tire changes and gas change out, and jacking up the car and dropping it, and then driving around a track and seeing what kind of prizes we can come up with.
So this is going to be an absolute rock star event. It's going to eclipse what we did in Nashville last year. If you got to go, you know what that means. And so that's October 10th through the 12th, and that's at paceacx.com. And so you can't afford to miss any of these events, and it's just going to be a blast. You're going to learn. The networking is incredible. We have brands showing up on the buy side. We have lead generators. We have contact centers, BPOs, and everybody in between. And then we, of course, are going to have our incredible general and regulatory counsel, Michele Shuster. They're kind of leading the way. Hopefully talking again to Lois Greisman. I love having her on the stage. We obviously are going to have her also in Arlington. So any parting words on our inaugural goodbye to our Keeping Pace?
Can only get better from here, Rob.
Edition 1.
That's right.
That's why we keep the bar
I think it's a
low
good
at
start,
the very
though.
beginning.
It's a good start.
Like, you know what? 3 months from now, people are going to go, this is so much better than it was that
We'll
very
blame
first
Josh.
day
Yeah, you can blame me.
Josh, thank you for joining. Yeah, we're going to blame Josh. This was perfect before he was at it. Josh, thank you very much for joining us today. Michele, as usual, you've outdone yourself. You keep us safe, and so thank you for everything you do for the organization and for the industry. And until next time, everybody, let's keep
Thank
the
you.
pace.